Good afternoon, everyone. Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Yasmin. Okay, excellent that everyone is wanting to catch up, but we need to make a start. Okay. No, stay here. Okay, all right, we'll let you go then. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name's Lance Gorin. I'm a Principal Water Resources Specialist here at ADB. I'll be your moderator for this afternoon's session, and I would like to welcome you all here today to talk for this thematic breakout session titled Ensuring Water Security for Food Security, Integrated River Basin Management and Coastal Resilience. I trust you all enjoyed your lunch and you're also adequately caffeinated yourself to avoid a post-lunch slumps, and now you're fully recharged and ready to enjoy and participate in this interesting discussion. This session will comprise a keynote presentation provided by Dr. Mark Smith, the Director General of the International Water Management Institute, followed by a lively panel discussion of outstanding speakers representing various organizations working across the river basin management landscape. During the panel discussion, we would like audience members to also fully participate, so please be ready with your questions and comments. But first, I'd like to make some opening remarks to help set the scene and explain a little bit why we're talking about river basins in a food security forum. In September 2022, ADB announced its food security ambition to provide at least $14 billion over the period 2022 to 2025, and a comprehensive program of support to ease worsening food crises in the region and to improve long-term food security by strengthening food systems against the impacts of climate change and biodiversity loss. Last year at COP28, 159 countries signed the Declaration on Sustainable Agriculture, Resilient Food Systems and Climate Action, which affirms that agriculture and food systems must urgently adapt and transform in order to respond to the imperatives of climate change. 2 of the 5 objectives of the Declaration are strengthening the integrated management of water and agriculture and food systems to ensure sustainability, and secondly, maximizing the climate and environmental benefits while containing and reducing harmful impacts. Food and water security are closely interconnected. Water is essential for agricultural production, which is the primary source of our food supply. Adequate and reliable water resources ensure that crops and livestock can be grown and maintained, contributing to food security. Conversely, water scarcity can lead to reduced agricultural productivity, impacting food availability and increasing the risk of food insecurity. Sustainable management of water resources is therefore crucial for ensuring a stable and sufficient food supply. This link highlights the importance of integrated water resources management approaches to support agriculture and food systems. Irrigated agriculture is a major water consumer, often accounting for about 80 to 90% of freshwater withdrawals in Asian countries. While irrigation boosts agricultural productivity and food security, it can also strain water resources, especially in arid and drought-prone areas. Over-extraction for irrigation can lead to declining groundwater levels, reduced river flows, poor water quality, and ecosystem degradation. Many irrigation systems are underperforming, and therefore modernizing these irrigation systems can play a major role in ensuring water and food security. Water quality is a critical component of water security. Contaminated or poor quality water can lead to reduced agricultural yields and may affect the health of livestock and crops. The use of polluted water in irrigation can introduce toxins into the food chain, affecting both the safety and nutritional quality of the food produced. Moreover, waterborne diseases from the contaminated water sources can reduce the workforce available for agricultural production. Water quality in river basins significantly impact coastal communities, ocean health, and the blue economy. When rivers carry pollutants, excess nutrients and sediments from agricultural runoff, urban discharge and industrial waste into the oceans, it leads to issues like eutrophication and dead zones that can harm marine ecosystems. This degradation not only affects biodiversity, but also undermines the blue economy. Ensuring water quality is essential not just for maintaining the health of the agricultural systems and safeguarding the quality of food produced, but also for protecting ocean health and supporting economic activities that depend on clean and vibrant marine environments. Lastly, natural capital, such as rivers, aquifers, wetlands and forests play a crucial role in ensuring water security and quality. These ecosystems naturally filter and purify water, regulate water flow and sustain the water cycle, thereby supporting the availability of quality water for agriculture and human users. Degradation of natural capital can diminish water quality and reduce water availability, impacting both food production and human health. Thus, preserving and enhancing natural capital is essential for maintaining ecosystem services that ensure water security and consequently food security. So in summary, there is a very complex relationship between the river basin management, land use management, water security, food security, protection of ecosystems, and climate resilience. Bringing these issues together under an integrated framework with coordination amongst all stakeholders is needed to ensure basin health, coastal health, and ocean health. And with this in mind, I would now like to invite Dr. Mark Smith to provide the keynote address. As mentioned earlier, Mark is the Director General for the International Water Management Institute, IMI, which is headquartered in Colombo, Sri Lanka. And Mark has more than 25 years of research and program management experience in his water resources management, agriculture, climate and sustainability, including stints at the International Union for Conservation of Nature, IUCN, and the World Water Council. Please, Mark, come entertain us. Thank you.
Thank you, Lance, and good afternoon, everybody. It's a real pleasure to be here and to, maybe if we could bring up the slides, please, and indeed to be able to take part in this session, which is on a theme that I really strongly welcome, more discussion around water security for food security. I think everyone understands that water is essential for agriculture and for food systems. And indeed, most in this room, I would expect, know that freshwater withdrawals around the world are mostly for agriculture, 70% globally, and 90% in many places, many countries as well. And yet, in policy dialogues and in the global debate on food security and on water security, most of the time, these discussions miss each other. Agriculture uses most of the water, but yet the agricultural sector is, I would say, very often vastly underrepresented in priority setting on water. So if we look, for example, at the UN conference on water that took place last March in New York, despite being such a substantial part of the problem, the voices of agriculture were not strongly heard in that conference, or strongly enough heard in that conference. And we saw also in the 2021 UN Food Systems Summit, for example, that the voice of water struggled really to be heard in that process as well. And I think fundamentally what is underlying that phenomenon of these dialogues missing one another is a misreading of what's really an intricate codependency of the water system and food systems, and a misreading of water risks in food systems. Water is not just another production input for agriculture and food. It is an existential risk to food systems, and that is not well enough understood. Resolving that, finding ways of managing those codependencies and those risks is complex, as you were outlining, Lance, and it does require us to be able to really manage complexity and embrace complexity in how we take on those challenges. So what I'm going to talk about, therefore, in these few minutes is how we take on that challenge. What is the experiences that we have to build on as we look into the future? I'm going to cover what I term 5 wicked water problems and what those teach us about this codependency of water security and food security, how these are reflected in the water management challenges, in the challenges for basin management in this region. And I want to talk a little bit about IWRM, Integrated Water Resource Management, and how we can use that, or how that provides a basic organizing framework for addressing this kind of complexity. And then share with you some of the results from research as well as practice that show how to tackle those 5 wicked problems as part of an integrated basin management approach to strengthening water security and food security. So that's what I'm planning to cover. Can you advance the slide, please? This doesn't seem to work. Okay, so before I get into these 5 wicked water problems, first, what do we mean by water security? We use this term to refer to achieving and sustaining access to an acceptable quantity and quality of water for the diverse needs that we have from water relating to health, livelihoods, ecosystems, and production, as well as, so the issues of quantity and quality are coupled then with ensuring that we are able to manage water risks, or that there's an acceptable level of water risks to people, to the economy, to environments. So when we refer to water security, we're talking about having enough water, water of good enough quality, and manageable levels of water risks. And that's a very easy thing to say, but it's very context specific in how we bring that about. And there are many interdependent problems are connected through water that we have to deal with as we address those aspects of water security. So these different uses of water are influenced, of course, by each other, and there are multiple users of water, therefore, who influence each other in the way that they manage their water. So on the screen is this framework of 5 wicked water problems that we can use to exemplify in practical ways what the complexity of these challenges tell us. So the first of the wicked problems it relates to hunger, and we all know that water is inextricably linked to food security, but the scale of that challenge is important too. So globally, we know that more than 1.2 billion people live in regions where agriculture faces water scarcity, and across this region, close to some 400 million people faced hunger in 2020. The second of these wicked problems refers to poverty and exclusion. So the problem of universal access to water and sanitation, and how far that is out of reach still, and how it makes it more difficult to escape poverty, and especially, of course, for women and girls and for marginalized communities. The third of these wicked water problems relates to ecosystem breakdown, and as was so starkly put by the FAO in their 2021 report on the state of land and water, ecosystems are at breaking point, putting at risk the capacity of land and water to sustain us. The fourth of these wicked problems, as the IPCC reported most recently, we know that every increment of warming increases water insecurity for the most vulnerable people because of links between climate change and droughts and floods and extreme events and shifting monsoons and rising sea levels. But it's actually worse than that. The problem is more difficult than that. The assessment is that the effectiveness of adaptation to these impacts is expected to fall sharply beyond 2 degrees of warming. And the implication of that is that the time we have to achieve water security is finite. And this is an unprecedented situation, not something that we've faced before in either water security or food security. And the future of water security, therefore, depends, yes, on climate change adaptation, but also on climate change mitigation. The final of my wicked problems is deep uncertainty. Again, this is a new and unprecedented challenge for water management. Climate change means that the past is no longer a guide to future water risks, as it's always been previously. but that the implication is that the probabilities then of future water risks are unknown. We can't quantify them in the same way that we have before. So we have to reconfigure the way we manage droughts and floods and water scarcity and so on. So new ways of integrating water risks into planning and investing and how we manage water. The implications then of these 5 wicked problems, first, they are interconnected. So water for food is not something we can manage in isolation. And second, if we leave other problems beyond water for food unresolved, then that in itself leaves water insecurity as a risk for future food security. So it's the case that a food secure future, which is the tagline of the CGIAR, of which IMI is part, a food secure future is only possible in a water secure world. And I think that's a fundamental framing for today's discussion. For this region, for Asia and the Pacific, we have the assessment of water security from the ADB, from their flagship Asian Water Development Report, which was last published in 2020, and that gives us a good level of insight into how those 5 wicked water problems translate into water security challenges in this region, and the need to raise water productivity, so output per unit of water consumed across sectors, including rain-fed and irrigated agriculture, to increase water storage, including through nature-based solutions, to tackle groundwater depletion, tackle the effects of glacier retreat, improve access to water and sanitation in rural communities, overcome the scourge really of pollution and its impacts on health and ecosystems. In urban settings, strengthening sanitation, wastewater treatment, innovation for circular management of water, deepening disaster resilience for floods and droughts and so on, and tied to that, the issues of improving water governance, more data for better monitoring and more data, and filling the financing gaps that we face for water. So a few minutes then on integrated water management. So how should we manage this complexity, this complex codependency of challenges and their technical and social and economic and political dimensions, as well as the interactions that they have across sectors and across scales, from local through to national and regional and basin scales and so on. So in the world of water management, we hear a lot about integrated water resource management, or IWRM, and calls for IWRM. What we mean by this is a coordinated approach to management across sectors and scales, across users, while meeting also the needs of ecosystems. And my impression is always that in food and agriculture, when the topic of water management comes up, the prescription is, well, we need IWRM and we need to higher water use efficiency in agriculture. And neither of those, they're very simple to say, but neither of them are simple to undertake. In the case of IWRM, it's built conceptually on a set of basic principles that guide IWRM. And in what you see on the screen on the left, in black, are the 4 original, what they call pillars for IWRM. So a legal and policy and institutional framework, including planning, the application of technical solutions and the capacities to do that, infrastructure and financing for infrastructure. And these are principles that have been in place since the 1990s, and they existed before that too, and they've been applied in water management reforms and policies across many countries at this point. But the critique is very often that they're too top-down, they're too technocratic, they don't properly reflect the real messiness of water management, and the realities that it takes place in a constant and noisy process of negotiation. So in work that I co-led around the time of the World Water Forum in 2018, we proposed 2 additional pillars for IWRM, which you see in red. And these were first, effective change management for multi-level, multi-stakeholder processes in water reforms, so trying to reflect that messiness and the need for negotiation. And the second was what we called operating mechanisms for IWRM, so strategies for practical problem solving underneath that framework of integrated water management. And what we meant by the latter then was that IWRM is a general conceptual framework. It elicits lots of debate, but we can work with it just as a general conceptual framework. And under this are a whole variety of different approaches for integrating that are tailored to delivering practical solutions for specific types of problems. So here's where we see the water, energy, food nexus, which people will have heard of, source to sea management, another form of integration, and integrated river, lake, or groundwater basin management. So then back to the focus for today, water security for food security. And what we take away from this is that water security for food security is embedded in the integration of water management across users, across risks, sectors, and scales. And the foundation for this integration is in legal policy and in institutional frameworks. But that this has to be complemented by practical strategies for problem solving. So what then are practical science-based approaches for tackling these interconnected wicked water problems? And in integrated basin management, I think the place to start is with ecosystem management. And here a key is water allocation. So within the limits of available water, how much can be allocated to agriculture, to energy generation, to cities, industry, and to aquatic ecosystems, and according to what timing of flows. On regulated rivers, to work that out, we apply environmental flows methods. So working out the flows that should be left in a river to sustain river ecosystems and ecosystem services while meeting the multiple demands that there are for water use. Embedded in that is, again, a lot of complexity. So to provide the analytical inputs to decision-making and negotiation of water allocations that are needed. So the example on the screen is work that IMI has done on developing this global environmental flows information system to support these environmental flows assessment. And in the example of the Indus Basin, we're working in the sg-afnr Nexus Gains initiative to introduce environmental flows into planning for Indus Basin restoration. So large-scale, big-scale issues of water allocation. So it's still on the theme of ecosystems. We zoom out now from the rivers and wetlands to the basin, and this is where we pick up on the mention that Lance made in the introduction of natural capital. So it's also key to protect, as we zoom out to the whole basin, to understand what is the natural capital and what is needed to protect it, to protect the ecosystem services that we receive from forests, from grasslands, from wetlands, indeed from agricultural landscapes, and the benefits that they provide for water supply, for filtration and improvement in water quality, for water storage and risk reduction, and the way that in which those services are critical to food production. And we can frame this also, protection of natural capital as investment in natural infrastructure, and so start to consider how we protect natural capital alongside other investments that we make in infrastructure for water security. And finally, we should also consider the importance then of the interconnections between river basins and their management and the coastal zone and coastal resilience. So again, as Lance touched upon, the way that river basin management relates to the supply of sediment, to stabilizing downstream coastlines, to the importance of freshwater flows for conservation of mangroves and their importance for coastal resilience, the provision of fish spawning grounds, protection of water quality through management of water in the basin and control of plastic contamination and so on. So the next thing I want to consider is incorporating water management. I want to consider incorporating water management to tackle the problem of poverty and strengthening inclusion. And of course, there are many dimensions to this. But want to consider the enormous challenge of access to safe drinking water and sanitation. And here, inclusion is key. So ensuring representation and participation for women, for youth, for marginalized group, and so overcoming barriers to access, and the vulnerabilities, overcoming the vulnerabilities that are strongly influenced by exclusion, strongly influenced by gender, and so on. So including the vulnerability of WASH to climate change impacts and ecosystem degradation. And the example shown on the screen is assessments that we've made at IMI for the for community level risks for WASH in the Women for Water project in Nepal. So now we come to water for food. And within the framework of integrated basin management, the core question then for this forum, and one of the challenges indeed highlighted in the Asia Water Development Outlook report, is how to produce more food with less water. So raising water productivity. And this requires coordination of interventions across scales, as gains in productivity at one scale can create losses in other parts of the system. So again, that point that these issues are not, they're not as simple as they may seem. So coordinating interventions ranging from use of different genetic improvement in different seed technologies through crop diversification, improved agronomic practices at the farm level and soil and water conservation in rain-fed agriculture, for example, to irrigation scheduling, irrigation modernization, applications of new irrigation technologies, combining with that institutional reforms and asset management, and as we go up scales, the role of water pricing and markets, the role of value chain development, and so on. So the challenge of addressing of improving water productivity is in itself also an integration problem across scales. And finally, just to make note of the importance as we do that of looking at and understanding the trade-offs that there are between water and energy, food and ecosystems in basin management, and so optimizing and managing and negotiating across the water, energy, food and ecosystems nexus. So we've shown then the tools that we have, some of the tools that we have for integrated management for water, for ecosystems, food and energy, how we can address inclusion and gender equality and health and poverty. But we must add climate change as well to how we manage. And it's critical to understand as we do that climate change is in many respects, climate change is water change. And as I referred to earlier, as the IPCC has said, every increment of warming reduces water security for the most vulnerable people. Because climate change is increasing the risks of floods and droughts and extreme precipitation, shifting monsoons and river flows, causing glaciers to recede, and salinization because of sea level rise. So climate change is water change, and it is an existential risk, as I say, to food systems. And this is increasingly recognized, finally, after a lot of effort in key initiatives and global processes. So in the COP28 Declaration on Sustainable Agriculture, Resilient Food Systems and Climate Action, which you see at the top left of the screen, integrated management was one of the top priorities that was included. And in the Global Goal on Adaptation, also negotiated in Dubai at the last COP, the target for water sits alongside targets for food, health, and ecosystems. So there are numerous water-related adaptation strategies to help us address those challenges, from seed technologies through to irrigation and water productivity, as I referred to, through to crop insurance and anticipatory action related to water, early warning systems for drought and flood management, wastewater reuse and recycling, integrated water storage, and nature-based solutions related to wetlands, all provide contributions to addressing the challenge of climate change adaptation. And this indeed leverages water system science, as I term it, leverages water system science from genes through to basin, so leveraging the capabilities across CGIAR, across that IMI brings to the table. But again, I reiterate this critical point that the effectiveness of these approaches and these strategies has been assessed to fall beyond 2 degrees of warming. And so that the available time that we have for building water security is finite. And climate change mitigation has to sit alongside these adaptation strategies for the purposes of water security. So, just before concluding then, I want to talk a little bit about the key issue of deep uncertainty in water risks. And the issue here is not simply data and monitoring, which is always a challenge in water management, but deep uncertainty, as I said earlier, deep uncertainty means that the probabilities of future water risks are increasingly unknown. In the past, water risks were quantified using our knowledge of historical hydrology, but with climate change, the frequencies of events are changing, and they will continue to change as the future unfolds. And this has really key implications that need to be better understood, including in the agricultural and food community. So it means that we need new tools for monitoring and assessing water risks, and that our knowledge of water risks needs to be updated, indeed, as they change. So we need risk-based approaches to decision-making on future infrastructure and investment using scenario methods, and that mean that we can then identify plans and investments that will be robust across multiple possible futures and that are designed with flexibility in mind. This requires monitoring systems, so for drought, for example, as you see on the screen, as well as for monitoring for irrigation performance, for example, using satellite-based water accounting, using the Water Accounting Plus methodology, as we do at IMI in the WAPOR program alongside FAO and IHE. We are using and developing dashboards that integrate data and the updating of data to support governance, to support accountability in water management, to support accountability in climate change adaptation, as we're doing in Pakistan in a program called RAP for Water Resource Accountability Project, as well as leveraging, of course, the enormous opportunities that are emerging with new technologies, new digital technologies, new analytical technologies for water management, including artificial intelligence, and such as development of digital twins to support digital twins for basin to support decision making under uncertainty, which is something that we're starting to do now at IMI with some partners in different river basin organizations. So that's moving very quickly and emerging very fast and has great potential to contribute to this problem of managing with deep uncertainty. So to wrap up, food security is vulnerable to a set of wicked water problems. Governance and institutional frameworks are the foundation for water security and the foundation for this integrated management of water that we need to handle the complexities entailed. Integrated basin management then combines problem-focused, science-based tools across users and sectors and scales and types of risks and so on. But climate change is creating a finite window of time for adaptation and for achieving water security. And in that, as we approach that finite window of time, we're having to retool how we understand and manage water risks and take on this challenge that we see coming at us very quickly. I think that if we're going to have a food secure future, that's going to be possible only in a water secure world. This is a complex set of issues, it needs approaches that work effectively with complexity and with all of the different contributions that different actors can make. And I look forward now to an excellent discussion of how we make sense of all that in terms of really effective ways of moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Excellent presentation. Shows complexities and the linkages that are needed, and now we have to think about how we solve it all. It's something that we've been continuously trying to do for a long time, but maybe the wisdom in this room will help us move a step closer. So I'd like to call up our distinguished panelists to join Mark up on the podium. So first, I'd like to invite Ms. Jyotsana Puri. Jo is the Associate Vice President for the Strategy and Knowledge, I should say, at the International Fund of Agricultural Development. Thank you, Jo.
Where should I sit?
Oh, you can choose. Where would you like? Yeah, please. Up to you. Ms. Yasmin Siddiqui is a Director of our Agriculture, Food, Nature and Rural Development here at ADB, and she's particularly in charge of Region 1, which covers Central, West Asia and South Asia. Thank you, Yasmin.
Is it in any order?
Anywhere you like. Mr. Sakir Bhaskar, who is the Senior Joint Commissioner at the Ministry of Jal Shakti, India, which is the Ministry of Water Resources for India. Thank you, sir. Mr. Oshon Yi, who is my colleague, a Principal Water Resources Specialist at the Asian Development Bank, and he's in our Natural Capital team, and normally based in Beijing, but I'm very lucky to have him here. And lastly, Ms. Alessi Tuga, I pronounced that right. She is the Food Systems Program Lead at the Pacific Community, which is an international development organization owned and governed by 27 country and territory members, and it supports sustainable development by applying people-centered approach to science, research, technology across all the sustainable development goals. And I added that extra bit because your organization was new to me, so I wondered if maybe it was new to many people here in the room. So thank you so much for coming. And you're normally based in Suva, Fiji, right? So thank you. So I would like to try and make this as interactive as much as possible. So please do feel free, if you're in the audience and you have a comment or question, do please just put your hand up. We have a microphone in the middle of the room. I'm going to get the discussion going, I've got a number of pre-cooked questions here already, which I've shared with the panelists, and I'm sure they're prepared all night and their responses for it. So we'll go with one round first, and then we'll open it up to see if any of the audience would like to join in, and if not, then I have some more questions also organized. So let's see how we go. Okay, so the first question is to Jo. Since you're in the middle, you get to go first. In your role guiding IFAD's strategic initiatives in climate, agriculture, food security, and with the added responsibility of upholding environmental safeguards, could you please elaborate on how IFAD integrates the complex issues of river basin management, including watershed environments, ecosystems, and water security in the planning and evaluation process of your new programs? How does IFAD balance these integral environmental elements in its core mission objectives? You can choose to answer this question or answer one that hasn't been asked. How does IFAD approach this subject in summary?
How many hours do I have?
3 minutes. Let's go with 3.
Yeah, thank you so much, Lance. So I'm going to try and see if I can break it up because it's a really big problem, right? And after the excellent keynote presentation that we saw from Mark, I think starting off from there's no food secure future without a water secure future. I think I paraphrased that a little bit, but okay, poetic license. I think what we need to address is how do we do this operationally? And frankly, for me, that's the challenge that Mark threw to us, right? We know what we need to do, and we've got to figure out how to do it. So IFAD, as you all may know, we work in more than 80 countries, and we work with smallholder farmers. So that's the first part of what I really want to state, is that it's really critical for us to work on water, primarily because almost, well, as Mark said, almost all of agriculture is dependent on water, but so is food security. 70% of our projects or investments, and we have a 3-year program of work of approximately $10 billion, and we leverage approximately 1:5. What that means is that we've got to really ensure that because we are a lending organization, we've got to ensure that, our investments are safeguarded and are not as risky as one would think. So whether we are looking at Nepal, whether we are looking at China, whether we are China, Bangladesh, Indonesia, and I'll try and give you a couple of examples, or whether we are looking at large parts of Africa where most of our investments are located as well, water becomes central for us. Second is also highlighting the fact that climate is a very big part. So 90% of our portfolio, portfolio is adaptation related. And I think the IPCC lays out that 60% of adaptation problems today are water related. So that becomes the other salient feature or attribute of our overall investments. And then the third thing, just to go and give you a sense of the results that we are seeing, and then I'll talk for a minute or two about the investments. But the results that we are seeing, so when we looked at our portfolio of $8.5 billion that finished in 2021 for our replenishment, we realized that we were able to show, with the help of counterfactuals, so against those areas where IFAD is not going in with its program of work, we were able to show that we were improving the resilience of our targeted populations by more than 10%, so actually 13%. And it's statistically significant, so that's important, right? So we were able to show that. And given that 70% of our overall portfolio has water-related components in it, we can attribute that, amongst many other things, because this is really a management problem, to clearly the interventions that we are taking forward. So the kinds of interventions that we are doing are really to ensure that smallholder farmers are able to access water, are able to ensure that we are working with them in a watershed ecosystem. And watershed ecosystem, of course, I'm speaking to the converted here, is essentially where all of the rainwater is getting collected and all of those areas around where fresh water is collected from. So given that aspect, almost all of our investments have a watershed lens that we use. And there our interventions really focus then on looking at drought-tolerant crops and neglected and underutilized species, like in India, it's arhar or yellow lentil, right? In areas of, and India, by the way, 54% of India is either highly water distressed or extremely highly water distressed. So it becomes really important for us to try and see as to how we can ensure that those crops that we are supporting are truly drought resilient. So arhar, for example, is one example of a crop that we are supporting. In other parts, we are looking, so in other parts of Asia, in Nepal, we're looking at cowpea, we are looking at, there was another crop. So we are looking at cowpea, and we are looking at, well, cowpea for now, I'm going to use that example. The second thing we are looking at is also ensuring that something that is the non-cool part of irrigation and or agricultural development, just basic things like lining canals, ensuring that there's not a lot of loss of fresh water when we are building irrigation canals. They are the non-sexy parts of agricultural development, but those are really key for us as we focus on smallholder farmers. The third is looking at biochar-related investments, because we know that those can really help to increase fertility and ensure that there is an integrated development process that is espoused as we are working with smallholder farmers. And the last one is really about, and Mark spoke about this as well, is ensuring that all sorts of institutions and systems that we are building are really focusing on equitable allocation of water. But there, the key challenge becomes about pricing and incentives. And we know that smallholder farmers especially don't have a lot of market power, don't have the ability to really engage with water markets to the extent that they exist, or even exert power to ensure that they have access to a lot of these systems. So a lot of the development finance that we put in, whether in Nepal, whether in Bangladesh, whether in Indonesia, is really then focusing on building these institutions and systems. The one thing that we have not done in Asia and Pacific, but what we have done in Kenya, for example, are supporting water funds. So there is a project called the Upper Tana River Project, where we've taken combined payment for ecosystem services that is compensating upland farmers because their cropping practices are really instrumental in dictating as to how downstream the Nairobi River, the quality of the water in the Nairobi River is affecting downstream farmers. And so by creating this water fund where private sector actors such as Coca-Cola and others are coming in, we're able to create a compensation mechanism where not just cropping practices in the upper reaches of the Tana River are influenced, but also we are able to compensate them for any losses that they might encounter. So development finance, and this has been taken actually from Latin America and the Caribbean. We've transported it then with TNC and with the Global Environment Facility into Kenya. And now we're replicating that idea across 8 other sites in Africa. And the idea is to try and bring it to Asia as well. Thanks.
Oh, thank you, Joe. I mean, that's excellent. And I think the water fund is certainly interesting and something maybe that Sean will pick up on soon. But it's an approach of eco-compensation is really one good framework on trying to promote integrated river basin responses. Moving to Yasmin, ma'am. ADB has recently undergone its first major reorganization in 20 years to align itself with achieving our Strategy 2030 goals. This reorganization was based on 4 key shifts in how we do our business. These shifts are climate change, private sector development, solutions, and new ways of working. Focusing ourselves on the topic of the session, how do you see that ADB's new organizational structure benefits our developing member countries to continue enhancing their water and food security?
Thank you, Lance.
Thank you.
Thank you, audience. Thank you for joining this session, and thank you to panelists, and I think some of you who've traveled from very far. I'm just going to do a slightly more unusual approach here to answer your question, but I'd like to just ask the audience if you could put your hands up if you come from an engineering background. Okay. And how many come from an economics background? And how many come from environment and climate? And how many from the private sector? Okay. So perhaps to answer, as we saw, the majority engineers, economists. And how I see it, the new operating model that ADB has boldly established as the first MDB to take such a innovative approach, which is very timely, is, in my opinion, very much to bridge this challenge that we see, that if we look at what the issue today is, it's about climate change. And if we look at our focus to 2030, it's about achieving the 100 billion financing and to really support our clients in our developing member countries on working towards adaptation and resilience solutions. But what we see is largely, so far, we're divided in these 2 big groups of engineers, economists, and how I look at it is that the world that we look at today must be looked at through the climate lens. And it's what I'm often saying to our colleagues and our team members: put on your climate specs and look at the world through that lens, because every decision we make today has to be with a climate context. The new operating model provides us that opportunity to really link across these siloed ways that we've been working, where we talk about food security and water security. But what we need is that more engaging conversation around climate and the glue that builds it together. So to answer your question, Lance, how does ADB do this, and how does the norm help us? Well, firstly, it provides us with much more, a broader skill set amongst our groups and our teams to bring in integrated solutions. And I'm fortunate that our colleague Sean is here today, and I call him the glue. And what we need is the glue between those 2 big units that have been working till now to find those and facilitate those solutions. But today what I see is really critical, and what we do bring in through this new operating model is the glue that provides us that opportunity to flip the issue. So rather than looking at it from water and food alone, we start to look at it more thematically, which is from climate, environment, and social and gender aspects, which are those which are very critical in the challenges we face. So we need more of the glue, which provides a different perspective in finding solutions. And maybe we, as engineers and economists, take a backseat role and let them take the front seat role to drive us in the direction where we need to deliver. Because doing our siloed solutions will not give us the answer that we need. And I think this is where the NOM has been very helpful in pulling together a much broader audience and skill set. And I'm very pleased I can see in the audience as well many colleagues who work in our resident missions who are here with us today, who have tremendous talent and skills and knowledge and understanding of the needs of the client and the client country. And again, the new operating model bridges that and blends us into one seamless group which has a multifaceted skill set. So we now have people who know fisheries, we have people who know natural capital, we have people who know coastal management, which has been absent in perhaps the solutions that we were delivering in the past. That's one approach, and I think just given a good illustration here, we're working on a coastal management project in India. And of course, us engineers will always say, build a seawall, build a submerged reef, build, build, build. The economists will look at the cost, and the economists will look at the values. But what we have, fortunately, today is a project officer who is leading it, who comes from a background which is more around ecosystem management and environmental management, who can pull together all of us to deliver a much more comprehensive set of solutions. Secondly, with the shift, we can bring in more engagement from teams where we have solutions such as digital technologies. And I see Wim in the audience, and I'm sure, Wim, something you've been working on for the last at least 1 decade. But we need more people who understand digital technologies and how the private sector plays a role. Because again, through sovereign approaches alone, we cannot find the full set of solutions. There's a major role that the private sector can play in delivering to our client countries and to the people. And here, as we just did this quick poll, we have perhaps 2 out of the whole room who come from that background. So we need to see much more engagement. And again, the new operating model allows us to work much more upstream with private sector, with looking for those digital solutions, which may not be inbuilt to many of us who come from conventional backgrounds and trainings in very specific disciplines with very linear approaches to solutions. Lastly, it allows us to go much further upstream, to start developing approaches with our clients. So with our developing member countries, our governments, and I'm pleased to see here Nepal government representative, and we've been discussing the opportunities available to engage with private sector from day one. The solutions cannot come from sovereign side alone. So here's where ADB has taken this bold step forward to try to pull in all the players that are needed to deliver today's solutions for much more climate resilient approaches and to definitely be resilient for the future ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Yasmin. So I think a very nice segue then onto the glue. Sean. Sean is the glue. So, Sean, you've played a pivotal role in aiding the People's Republic of China government with the development and execution of 2 flagship integrated river basin management programs, namely the Yangtze River Economic Belt Initiative and the Yellow River Ecological Corridor Initiative. Can you please shed some light on the specific objectives that set by the government on these initiatives, and maybe also explain how the framework approach of these programs is structured to meet those objectives? Thank you.
So, thanks, Lance, and good to meet the panelists, and thanks to the audience for joining this session. I'm very happy to be the glue. Right? More power to the glue. So I think as Yasmin is saying, I think with the new operating model, we've really been given the power to really expand our approach and apply good practices across different regions. Before the NAMA was supporting East Asia region, leading the Yangtze River and then the Yellow River. So let me just take a step back just to show the context about where we came from in terms of the Yangtze River program. That's now become one of ADB's flagship programs, and where we're trying to show as a model to other regions for landscape, source to sea, landscape type approaches. Everything that Mark and others and Joe has been espousing today. So let's just take a step back. So ADB's traditional model of engaging with clients is often, we're often project takers. So the government usually has an idea of what they want. They have an idea that different regions, they want to do different things. And then they come to ADB and we package it and we do the projects. In the Yangtze River, from about 2000 to 2015, we did about $10 billion worth of projects. Scattergun, so, no real approach, just, whatever we had, we did it. Timing-wise, we were very lucky as well. So we were in a team where we were working very closely with the government, where the government was also thinking about taking a step back and looking at it from a master planning at a river basin scale. So ADB, we took advantage of this timeliness, and we took a proactive approach where we decided, okay, we've done a lot of work, but let's take a step back and let's engage with the government proactively, work with them, not just at the central government level, but also at in the case of China, the provincial level, the county level. We initiated an engagement where we asked the government for the programming exercise to bring all these players together, the different stakeholders in the different regions together, and let's discuss priorities at the basin scale. This is actually very new because, each province, each state, if you will, they have their own, their desires, and they lobby, as a lot of countries do, lobby for their funds. They lobby for a project. So by taking a step back and looking at it, working with the government at the stage where they were looking at doing a master planning exercise for the Yangtze River, around September 2016, when the State Council released an outline for the Yangtze River master plan, we took that opportunity to sit down with the government and discuss what are the priorities for that basin. And the outline of their master plan was very ambitious. They had targets for water quality that they wanted to see in the Yangtze mainstream and the tributaries. They looked at vegetation cover. They looked at many different indicators. So that set a very nice foundation for ADB to come in and say, okay, these are the areas that you guys are trying to achieve. How can ADB come and help you? And then we identify at the river basin scale, where are the areas where you have maybe weak ecological environment? So in the Yangtze River, the central government at I think the 11th or the 12th, they call 5-year plans, they already identified that green development, green economy was going to be prominent. And that worked perfectly for ADB at that time because we were coming in looking at ecological restoration, environmental improvement, water management, integrated water resource management. It's a big key area that we still espouse today. And then we identified where are these areas along the Yangtze, the upstream catchments, the midstream, and in some cases down towards the delta, but mainly our work is in the upstream where the damage and the degradation has been occurring from the industrialization over the decades prior. And we identified with them a cluster of programs. But let me again espouse that it's very difficult to just say that, okay, at a landscape scale, that sounds really nice, but these provinces, they're mini countries. They're as big as different countries in Europe, and they're all powerful. They have their own agenda. The Yangtze River transcends the boundaries across these geographical areas. So what is the mechanism that we can help the government to work through in terms of incentives? So Joe touched on this. These incentives are what drives change across the landscape. And so for PRC, ADB was in a very privileged position. Since around 2008, we worked with their planning, the powerful Planning Commission, National Development and Reform Commission, to work with them around upstream, downstream engagement. The upstream catchments, what they will get out of protecting their catchments, why can't they develop? Like the downstream, the richer catchments, the cities down in the coast. Eco-compensation was born, and ADB works with NDRC for the last more than 10 years around developing and supporting the government in developing this mechanism. Understanding how can we get a mechanism to make upstream, downstream communities and provinces work together. So it's a brilliant mechanism, because what you do is the government provided a fund, and it's a transfer payment. You know, it's a type of subsidy, but it's an incentive to provide incentives for upstream catchments to protect their ecosystems, protect their vegetation, protect the headwaters. And then they have agreements between these provinces around water quality, in this case, for the focus of the Yangtze. And then when these water quality targets are met, a payment is made from the downstream catchment to the upstream catchment. So already now we have a mechanism to make the different regions engage. And this was crucial because the central government had to play a key role to facilitate this process. If you just left the states and the provinces to their own accord, they would not have any incentive to work together. One side of the river may be industrialized, the other side wants to be industrialized. Why should they not develop? So there's really quite a conflict, inherent conflict, which is, as Mark very eloquently put, you know, these are wicked problems. Multi-dimensional, multi-complex, multi-sector, changing goalposts, if you will. So with this mechanism, we managed to engage provinces, upstream and downstream, to work together, which was half of the problem, because the institutional aspects that the central government had to play a role in improving had to provide these incentives for the states to engage. So the role of the central government is actually quite key. Eco-compensation is basically a form of PES in many respects. It's a fund. There's vertical transfers and there's horizontal transfers. So vertical from the state, for the central government, down, and then also between states when they meet their water quality targets. So these incentives are absolutely key, and the policy reforms from central government level is also key. So ADB has also been fundamentally involved in the eco-compensation regulation. So my colleague Dongmei here has also been involved in that process to try to support the legislative and institutional change. The other one that I'll touch on is Yangtze River Protection Law. This was the first ever legislation that focuses specifically on a river basin. And it outlines specific areas on climate change, impacts, disaster risk management, basin-wide information sharing platform using digital platforms for capturing data on monitoring the ecosystem habitat and the changes over time. So all of these things, when you have the support of the central government, so when ADB comes to the central government and helps them think about it from a river basin scale, you put in the upstream work to really get that agreement. And then the programming is actually much more smoother, because the government has a ready reckoner, if you will, about the types of projects that they need and what location, in what areas in the upper catchments or the degraded catchments that need to be fixed or upgraded to achieve the water quality targets. So it's very logical, and when we think about it, it's not rocket science, but it's about putting the effort in building the relationships and building the trust. In my career, and I've been a water planner. You know, we talked about water allocation. I've been doing water allocation plans in Australia in my previous life, wearing my engineering hat and looking at, okay, where extractive use, non-productive use. You know, we do all of these things, but you know, a lot of these problems are ultimately a social problem. So we can find an elegant engineering solution for all of these things, but ultimately, you get down to the crux of it. It's the client. It's ADB or it's other partners like IMI and FAO, others. It's about talking to the client, understanding what they want, and proactively sharing what we can do together. It's about putting these different ideas together and packaging it in a way that is palatable. So now we're moving away from the Yangtze down to the Yellow River. So we've taken this model, and now we're scaling it and replicating in the Yellow River. So the Yellow River is very much a more purposeful and deliberative program, looking at it from first principles, looking at, okay, how do we do this? And so we've been very successful, and now we've got more than $1 billion worth of pipeline, and it will still grow. And the beauty of the NOM now is that I'm now processing the coastal program in India with Region 1. So you know, I'm taking that expert experience from many projects in the Yangtze and some in the Yellow. I processed the first Silk Road project in Yellow River. And we can now try to understand how can we adapt the lessons where appropriate. We can't just pick up and apply. Where can we then apply in another basin? But with the understanding that there's different governance systems, different country systems, but at the fundamental level, looking at the basin scale, that's the same. It's about that narrative and taking the client with us along the way to build that necessity of understanding and the trust and the collaboration, and working also with our development partners to make sure that we're not reinventing the wheel. The last point I will say is, why have we done all this? It's because, as Mark said as well, the time is running out. So the reason why we've had to change our approach is because we can't do things the way that we've done before. We need to look at ways to synergize our investments for greater impact. So instead of a scattergun investment approach, which in Australia we call the Vegemite approach, the land care movement there, we just threw money everywhere. But then we decided now to look at more strategic co-benefits. How do we catalyze impact by working together with NGOs? So we work with TNC on projects with the World Bank, for example, in Huangshan, when we did an eco-compensation scheme there in Anhui province. Downstream of that, the World Bank was working with TNC in Qiandao Lake. So there's these shifts in the way that we work. And so now I work closely with my counterparts in the World Bank in Beijing office, and also now we work with the UNDP to try to understand how do we do this thing better. So it's a social problem, it's a social issue with engineering solutions, and there's just no way around to it. So it's about a model that we can try to apply in other regions, and now we've got Bangladesh as well, delegation coming to PRC to learn about this process, and we're trying to help them understand what we did and what are the processes that they can go through to achieve a similar outcome. So I'll leave it there. I'm sorry I've taken up a bit of my time, but happy to indulge if there's any other questions.
Well, thank you, Sean. No, I mean, very comprehensive. I think you could probably talk for hours on the subject, but shows that what can be done in a very challenging, I guess, political, institutional, one of the largest rivers in the world, still achievable there. So hopefully we can learn a lot from those programs and apply them elsewhere. But moving away from a very integrated approach, we're going to dive back into engineering for a moment, because I'd like to ask Mr. Sakir a question about the role of irrigation, because as Mark alluded to in his keynote, was that irrigated agriculture is a predominant user of freshwater resources. And I do a lot of irrigation engineering work myself, and to me that's one of the lowest hanging fruit. If you can address irrigation, then you could probably solve a lot of the other water security and food security issues in the river basin. So from India government's perspective and the Ministry of Jal Shakti, what are some of the initiatives that you're doing at the central level that can help to address the, I guess, water use inefficiencies of existing irrigation systems? What can be done to raise the crop water productivity of irrigated agriculture systems and so forth? Please share with us.
Thank you. Thank you. In India, we have very well realized the problem of the food security and also the water stress and the role of that is called, in India we call it SMF, that is small and marginal farmers. So realizing this issue, we have initiated a new scheme. It is called Modernization of Corn Area Development Works. So it will provide the pressurized water for the micro irrigation. The water will be supplied from any source. The source of the water may be anything, but however it should be an established source, and the water will supply the water from the established source up to the farm gate. So this will make the entire area, the common area is ready for the micro irrigation. So this will reduce our dependency on the groundwater, because in India right now the micro irrigation is very much dependent on the groundwater. So this is very important for us. And also the scheme that we have planned now, the life cycle is very less, is only for 2 years. So and also the area that we are planning now, it may vary from 50 hectare to 5,000 hectare of area. So that way also, since the area is less, we can take up many areas at a single time to and go at a very high speed to finish our work. As I have already told, so under this scheme we shall be combining all sources of water available in area, that maybe the surface irrigation canals, maybe some tanks, maybe some ponds, or any water bodies, or even the groundwater also, if there is no other source of water is available. Then now we hope that this, using this micro irrigation, the farm water user efficiency can be increased up to 90%. So it will free up a lot of water, and with this saved water, we can expand our existing command, and also give more water for the drinking, and even for the e-flow also, that is for the environmental purposes. And we are planning to use a lot of like technology here, like smart irrigation and digital twins. So we are hopeful that it will help the farmers very much. And under the social reforms, if we see, so after we finish our scheme, with the project is completed, the whole scheme will be handed over to the farmers. So it will be the farmers who will be actually handling the whole scheme. They will look after the maintenance and collect the fees, like the water fees and everything. So they will be actually the owner of the whole scheme, and the monitoring will also be done by them. So the government of India or the state government have no role to play once the scheme is over. Now the scheme is also not in. We are planning to execute the scheme all over India. So there are like 28 states in India. So in every state, at the initial stage, we will take 3 to 4 schemes in each state. So that way we can cover the entire country also, and it will also promote our organic farming also. And regarding the financial reforms, we can say once this water user society is created, they may be converted to an economic entity, and once it is an economic entity, they can go for the PPP model, and they can also engage some of these private entities for the technical support and also some technical upgrades. So also under this scheme, we will be giving incentives to the states if they finish their schemes before the time, that is the stipulated time of 2 years, or if they are able to attain the e-flow water for the e-flow. So the scheme, in a nutshell, we can say that what we think now is the SMF is the key for the sustainability, productivity, and efficacy and the efficacy of an irrigation projects. So until and unless we empower them, we give them the ownership of the scheme, it is not possible to have the food security and the water user efficiency, whatever we are planning now. So this SMF should be strengthened, and our planning is to so what we think that with this sense of ownership by this SMF, the projects can be made more sustainable, and with this we can lessen the burdening on the water resource department of our states. So role of the sovereign will be very, very less. That way we can achieve a lot of things.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. So quite a comprehensive program to really modernize a large scale, 80,000, what is it, how many, 80 million hectares of irrigation?
Initially, actually, we are planning 2.45 lakh hectare.
Okay.
And this is for phase 2. And when we go for the phase 2, so it will be like, it's a
Much
scheme,
larger,
yes.
so very
Much
large.
larger, very large.
But ticks all the boxes in terms of incentives, the states as well as to the farmers to modernise their systems and to promote water-saving efforts, environmental flows. So
Yes.
very nice. Thank you. Now I'd like to move on to Ms. Alessi. So this is coming down to the very downstream end of the basin, because one of the objectives of this whole session was to try and show some linkages between what we do at the river basin level has an impact on the oceans and the coastal zones. So you come from Pacific, largest ocean that we have, and you're directly focused on the food issues and the marine life in the Pacific. Sorry. Considering the intricate connection between river basins and the coast ecosystems, can you please share with us the impact of river basins activities on the coastal areas, and maybe draw from local contexts where you can provide examples of where the human activities in the river basins have led to degradation of these coastal and marine ecosystems, and possibly what are some of the solutions that you think would work well?
Sure. Bulabanak, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today. Thank you, Lance, for the invitation. I guess before I answer your question, just to quickly, I know you mentioned or explained about SPC, the Pacific Community, the organization I represent, but I thought I'd just quickly just throw in a few more lines, but also just the general water circumstances in the region. So SPC is an intergovernmental organization. We're a member-based organization, so owned by 27 Pacific Island countries and territories, where the region's, we'd like to think we're the region's premier technical and scientific organization. So we have technical expertise that cover over 27 sectors, from agriculture and forestry to coastal and oceanic fisheries, geosciences, water, energy, and so on. And also all grounded in people-centered approaches. So we've got also a massive human rights division in our organization. So I sit in the Land Resources Division, but I am one of 4 flagships. We've created 4 flagships under the SPC strategic plan, of which one is food systems, gender, oceans, and climate change. And the idea is to promote integrated approaches across the organization, which is not the easiest thing to do, because there's a lot of scientists and technical folk in our organization who, they come in just to do their technical work and all the technical engineering solutions and so on. So there's a few of us that need to sort of, bridge that scope around where is that we can actually work together and be more efficient. And our members, our ministers and our leaders have really put water and ocean resources at the center of our priorities and our work. All our leaders endorse the 2050 strategy of the Blue Pacific continent, so really reinforcing not just the oceanic resources in terms of the Pacific Ocean, but also all waterways and tributaries and all sorts of areas where we can access water. Our countries have fragile water resources. We're very small. We've got countries that have 1,000 people, 1,500, to places like PNG, which have over 7 million. So very varied in terms of number of people, but also in terms of resources. So the Melanesian countries particularly, very strong land-based agrarian activities, but of course wanting to focus on coastal resources, where water is really a fundamental issue and challenge for us. We, of course, have seen lots of natural challenges in terms of cyclones and hurricanes, and of course, too much water also causes a lot of problem in the Pacific. So we're from an extreme of having limited or no water to having lots of water also poses some challenges for us. Water and health, water and sanitation particularly is a big one, and that's really sort of what's been, in terms of our water division, have found that quite challenging with access to communities or the lack of access to poor sanitation. So a lot of that have been really around disposal of domestic waste, really poor management of that. So lots of pathogen introductions into the water systems. We've also started to build up our One Health capacities in the Pacific, or in our organization, because we recognize that it's not just about food systems, but embracing more a One Health approach, because it's about animal health, environmental, and human health. So really trying to push that agenda through. Of course, plastics feature very strongly in the work that our team does in waterways. And we've found that particularly our fisheries division are really struggling with that. Well, not struggling, but have found that that's really a core piece of work that's taken up a lot of their resources in recent years, because they're finding, of course, a lot of the scientists are finding macro or nanoplastics in food, particularly fish, coastal fisheries, so impacting quite a lot on what we're doing in that space. A lot of the work in terms of solutions is really just working with the communities. It's really trying to go down to grassroots, because we're an intergovernmental organization. We interact and interface predominantly with the line ministries, so with the ministries of agriculture, health, fisheries, and the waterways, and so on. But really, because we're trying to advocate for a people-centered approach, and we know food systems, whilst it's a global phenomena, everything is impacted at the local level. So, and basic necessities like water is really still a fundamental challenge for us. So partnerships is really a key one for us, not just in terms of technical capacities, but also obviously resource mobilization. We got support most recently through the Bezos Earth Fund, so really reaching out to non-traditional partners, if you will, so approaching philanthropic organizations. So the Bezos Earth Fund had announced 100 million support to the Pacific, of which one of the key areas that we're going to be focusing support, which includes water, is around coastal food systems. So we're really excited about that. It's a work in progress, but we're hoping to get some of that resourcing channel through to us before the end of the year.
Thank you. Very exciting. Thank you. We are running out of time, unfortunately. I'm going to ask Mark to maybe just reflect or respond to any of the points that have been raised by the panelists. Maybe you can spend 3-4 minutes on that, and then we'll take a few questions from the floor. Please, Mark.
Sure, thanks, Lance, and thanks to everyone on the panel for your great comments, actually, which I take away from what you've all said, that the core question that we all agree on is how do we synergize, which is imperative to take on these multifaceted, complex issues. How do we break out of our silos? But I feel very optimistic, actually, having listened to you all, because I think all of our institutions have been learning how to do that, and learning how to do that relative to very concrete objectives and goals, whether that's for the Yangtze, whether it's for smallholder farmers, irrigation modernization in India, et cetera, et cetera. And if I compare perhaps the same discussion or the same session that we might have had 10 and 12 and 14 years ago, 15 years ago, I don't think there'd be this level of shared understanding of the need to break out of these silos, and we wouldn't have accumulated the same level of learning about how we really do that. So I feel very encouraged. But still, I see in front of us enormously complex issues that require us to find those synergies, to align together across whether it's government or the private sector or local governments or NGOs, to align around a common framework, a common set of objectives. Perhaps that becomes clearer as we get closer to the ground, as we make it concrete about real problems in the Yangtze, for example, or the water funds in the Nairobi Basin, etc. But how do we find that alignment? And certainly for IMI, the role we play amongst the ecosystem of institutions that are working on all this, we're a knowledge, research, and innovation institution. But as we've been looking over the last year at our strategy for the next 7 years and asking ourselves, right, how do we make sure that we are contributing with what we bring to the table to this search for synergies, to the need for collective action around which we can all align. And so that's as we'll publish our strategy or launch our strategy in next month in Bali at the World Water Forum, and that's at the crux of it. How do we be more effective with the mandate we have as a knowledge research and innovation institution to help contribute to and help drive and the kinds of synergies that we need to resolve these complex challenges in the time that's available to us to really get on and make a difference and do things. So, thanks.
Great. Thank you, Mark. Okay. So, do we have anyone in the audience that'd like to raise a question or make a comment? If you do, yes, please introduce yourself first. There's a microphone in the middle. If you're targeting a specific panelist, please also refer to them. Thank you. Is the microphone working? Can someone help?
Hello, I'm Annabelle Kabanban. I'm the country manager of Wetlands International Philippines.
Here we go.
This is addressed to everyone.
Okay.
It may be a pointed question to ADB. How can we work together here in the Philippines, for instance? The reason I ask this question is because we, Wetlands International, has been working with the Oro River Basin Management and the CSR arm of a fruit plantation company in the Bukidnon watershed, and also with the Cagayan de Oro River Basin Management is a multi-stakeholder platform. This project is the Reach to Coast Rain-to-Top project for sustainable water supply in the Cagayan de Oro city. This project was born because of the Sendong, the typhoon that has passed through Mindanao, which flooded Cagayan de Oro River and destroyed the water district facilities. And to make the long story short, the Dutch water companies, with funding from the Dutch government, developed this project with us to address the water district's problem. But they really wanted to address the root cause of the flooding. So they approached Wetlands International to address why this happened. And of course, it's because of the destruction, deforestation, the watershed. So we worked with these three components for work package 2, which is to reduce the risk to flooding. Component 1 is to reforest the watershed using reforestation, working with the communities, and this is a pilot, by the way, and then with the Cagayan de Oro River Basin Management to promote payment for ecosystem services because restoration of the watershed would cost some money, and they worked with us, with Wetlands International, to come up with a hydrological model and decision support tool so that there will be a tool that can be used to communicate with stakeholders that if you do reforestation in the forest, this will have an impact on the flooding or reduce the risk of flooding downstream. I'm a marine biologist by training, but I do know the problems that we face in the coastal waters with regards to pollution, sedimentation, and others, so that's why we are involved with this project. And I hope that we can work together.
Oh, thank you so much for sharing that. Would anyone like to respond, or that was for our information only? Okay. Thank you. No, your project, it really demonstrates how working across these different organizations can help. And you're nice to know that you're a marine biologist, but you're actually recognizing that the issues are upstream in the basin, and you were trying to resolve the watershed issues that will hopefully improve the marine life as well. Thank you. Yeah. Any other questions? Yes, I see two hands down the back. Maybe we'll just take these.
Yeah, it's a
sorry.
short question, Lance. So
Yeah, thank you.
just want to check on the scale of operation, because as I spoke on the social issues when you go down to the grassroots level, apart from the clearances and all those stuff in most other countries. Sorry, I didn't introduce myself.
Yes.
Swaminathan from India. But then how do we really see at the scale of basin or sub-basin or at a watershed scale? So which will be a kind of a viable unit in which you can little drill down and then start working? Because we have been hearing at the basin level, Murray-Darling, or you say the greater Mekong region, are not more than 5 or 6 basins for the last 40 or 50 years, if I remember correctly. But then how do we really see the new norm from ADB's lens, and how do we go down to the level where it can be applied in the large scale? Hope I made my point clear.
I think the point is, how do you take like an example from the Mekong or the Murray-Darling, but actually apply that at a much smaller scale at the local level watersheds? Would that be correct?
That's what I'm asking,
Yeah.
because when you look at very big, the investments are big, clearances, the associated issues, and what you talked about, the social problems at the community level. So you have so many complexity coming in. So how do we reduce the scale from basin? Either you go down to the level of sub-basin level or at a watershed level. Okay. So I just wanted to understand what is that, where you can go for scalability. Because I couldn't hear for the last 40, 50 years beyond this 5, 6 basins where you had successfully implemented. Thank you.
Yasmin? Yes, thank you.
Hello, Mr. Swaminathan. Nice to see you. Thank you for your question. So just, of course, as you say, there's been this historical work on the major basins, but just to give you a couple of examples of more recent work that we've been doing in other countries. We have an example where we have gone down into more of the sub-basin, and a good example is from India that Lance would know very well as well, in Karnataka state, where we've been working on the Krishna River Basin, which of course is a vast river basin. But what we've done is gone with the government, identified with the government the key sub-basins, and then using selective criteria, again in consultation with the government, worked on which is a priority sub-basin that we could commence with, just due to the scale of that river basin. Now, in the case of the Krishna River Basin, the selected sub-basin has been selected because it's a closed basin and doesn't trigger any of the interstate challenges that often exist in many river basins. So we've started using that as I wouldn't say a pilot, but as the entry point. The lessons learned from that are then to be replicated by the state itself in the other sub-basins. So that's one example. Another quick example I'll give you is a recent work we've commenced in Uzbekistan, and our colleague is here from the government. And we're working on the Amu Darya River Basin, which is, of course, not comparable to the Yangtze and so on, but has its own set of issues. And again, there, what we've done is we've used a climate risk-based approach. So we've done a downscaling of global climate models to the river basin level, picked out the critical locations where you've got the hotspots of climate risk, and used that as the entry point to address your priorities which are linked to climate risk. So working again with the government to identify the risk hotspots, and then coming up with a roadmap, an investment plan with the government using risk-based approach. So I think from what we're looking at now in a number of countries, Tajikistan, Pakistan, Armenia, Georgia, is using risk-based entry points and using risk as our priority rather than trying to look at the entirety. I hope that answers your question.
I'll just supplement that. So when we talk about, for example, the Yangtze, the Yellow River Basin, we're certainly breaking that is the big scale, the microcosm for the nexus for water climate. But at our project interventions, they're very much at a sub-basin scale. So in a specific province or county, we're looking at a small watershed where there's identified, as Yasmin said, the government, together the provincial government, has identified key hotspots based on their assessment or together with us to identify these key degraded areas that are critical to the program logic around getting towards the water quality targets in the mainstream, looking at the tributaries that go into their system, and we work with them to identify where are the areas that they see that they need intervention. So it's very much at the basin scale, but at the sub-catchment scale, and we're working it down to the county. And so we're working down to lake basin catchments, where in the PRC they've got a very progressive incentive system called, they have the river chiefs, lake chiefs, where the mayors and the local political figures are personally responsible for achieving water quality targets in these stretches of the river. And it's published and it's used as a bit of a name and shame thing. So, there's an incentive for the officials to ensure that there are processes and procedures in place to achieve those targets. So we work in that framework at that sub-basin scale that contributes to the overall plan for the basin. So that's why institutionally working with the national government is important to have those targets, and then working downwards at the provincial or lower level scale to identify what are those steps and the logic involved to achieve that. So we can't be everywhere all at once, but we can work with them to identify these key areas that have the most impact.
Thank you, Sean. Okay, we have maybe the lady at the back, and then one quick question from down the front, and then we'll have to wrap it up. Otherwise, you won't be able to have your coffee and snacks outside.
Thank you, moderator, and also speakers, keynote speakers. You gave a very excellent presentation. You mentioned 2 points as additional direction in integrated water management. One is to enable the basin to deal with change. Yeah, another one is digitalized management. So from my understanding, in the current integrated land water use system, you speakers have already mentioned the social engagement and water allocation, but at the farm level, there is one of the approach used in China's Heihe River Basin is about a kind of incentives similar like a market mechanism. The government set different price of water, gave a certain standard amount to each farmer household. When you use more than that water, you need to pay more. But if you save water, you can selling out your water tickets, get money back. So under this incentive mechanism, the government also launched technical projects assistance to farmers to help them to replace thirsty crops to drought-tolerant crops. By these two ways work together, so the farmers, they are encouraged to replace their thirsty crops and the plant, the drought-tolerant crops, and then the total agriculture water use were controlled and were reduced in the region. I think this is a market mechanism. What I would like to know is in current time, because the water use sometimes is not only depending on the knowledge or the practice of farmer itself, but also relevant to changing climate and availability of water. That is the link to innovative technology and the digitalization of the management. So what is the plan of ADB Bank in the future project can involve in these two elements to enable the local farmers can keep timely change according to the climate change by digitalized innovative technology? This is my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Who would like to tackle?
I just thought I'd give someone else a go. But I think that's a very good point. And one of the drivers for our work in China is one of the more, I guess, sophisticated clients, if you will, is these regional global public goods, of which knowledge is critical. So a lot of these practices that we have also worked with in China, for example, we will then share with other DMCs when the context is appropriate to do so. So, for example, you mentioned the water saving tickets. Very much these incentive mechanisms, these innovative and market-based mechanisms, these are things that we've been looking at very closely. And also looking at things like valuation of ecosystem services, natural capital accounting, and as you're aware, ecosystem assessment that you and your agency is doing. We're looking at how we can reconcile these different practices and apply them in a more practical way in other regions. Because at the end of the day, it's still incentives. Farmers are not incentivized to change if they don't see the benefit of doing different practices. They won't change. This is universal, wherever you are when you talk to farmers. So I think it's critical to capture these things. And in our PRC program, we've got a regional knowledge sharing initiative, RKSI, where we're trying to capture these approaches and showcase them as innovative examples that can be learned from in other regions. So certainly, knowledge right now is one of the fundamental public goods that we're trying to promote.
Can I just add to that one? Sorry for ADB hogging the responses here. But please, colleagues, if you have any points to add. Maybe we can also hear from India government as well on this. But just PRC is, of course, perhaps one of the great examples we have of very advanced approaches on cost recovery, payment for ecosystem services. But largely that's also because you have an enabling environment created in which this can be achieved. In many of the countries we work in, which are quite vastly different in terms of the enabling environment, ADB and other development partners play an important role in supporting government to help create those conditions. So whether it's through policy-based lending or recently what we've been doing more of sector-based lending, where we can start to work in the policy environment as well, because in many countries you might not actually have the legal framework to deliver that type of solution. So it requires much more comprehensive working in the policy, legal, institutional frameworks as well. And we can see that now happening in other regions as well. But definitely it's a pathway that will take time to get to that example of PRC. It's a pathway to it. And I think in other countries, while we're on that journey, we do have to attempt various approaches. And I think, again, it comes back to the use of technologies and in some ways also empowering farmers with knowledge and information so that they can make the choices. And our irrigation systems are also modernized into be able to moving towards much more demand-based systems. And I think we have a very good example from India in Madhya Pradesh, where we have a fully pressurized pipe system, which then gives much more control. So I think it's a combination also where you haven't got the full framework around you of finding solutions through other mechanisms, including empowerment of the user at the end of the day, who has to be our ultimate client.
Thank you, Yasmin. Joe?
Yeah, no, thanks very much, Lance. And I just thought I'd come back on a couple of things that I'm taking away. And I was referring to ADP because the questions were for ADP. Yeah, but yeah, no, they're really great questions and really good comments from the audience. But I think there are two things that I'm taking away. One is the power of incentives, clearly, right? And even in India, and we know that just by creating the incentive to conserve water, I think it becomes, well, and combining that with the enabling environment, we've seen lots of commercial actors have been asked, and I won't name sort of a soda company that was coming to India that was setting up. We can guess. That was setting up its factories in the state of Kerala and was basically asked to move out, primarily because it could not ensure that groundwater extraction was not going to be held at sustainable levels, right? So that's sort of the combination of the enabling environment where you have a strong enough governance structure, but combining that also then with the authority to with the empowerment that goes along with it. But I think at an institutional level, the incentives also, so from IFAD side, for example, we have the social, environmental, climate assessment procedures, which are not just a safeguarding facility, but they are really a design facility as well. So in each one of our investments, those have to be considered, and unless you reach a certain threshold, and clearly water and unsustainable use of water is a really big part of that. So that also creates the incentives for the investment officers that are sitting in IFAD to ensure that those things are dealt with. But enabling environments or disenabling environments can also go the other way. Subsidies. And again, the subsidies that have been provided for, say, diesel-generated electricity has led to unsustainable extraction of water and some of the lowest groundwater levels that we've seen in a very long time from the country that I come from. And so that part becomes really important to recognize, given the intertwined nature of and the unintended consequences of a lot of these economic instruments that I think we need to consider. And the last point is really on naming and shaming. Sean, you're absolutely right. Actually, there's a wonderful economist, Yoon Yoon Ang. She's written a lot on the experience of PRC. I think the cool thing that comes out from the PRC experience is, of course, that you've got the monitoring and the data systems to look at these sub-basin indicators for water quality. But a lot of the countries, as Yasmin said as well, don't have those systems to look at sub-basin water quality. Until we can do that, and I'm not a big advocate of name and shame, but I think it does have a lot of power, I think it is important to recognize what the systems that we need, the monitoring systems that we need to then try and ensure that. So measure, measure, measure. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, 1 minute, Leslie, please.
Very quickly, I think just bringing another dimension. I mean, you've all picked on the policy and regulatory element, but I think from the Pacific context, really underpinned also by traditional knowledge and indigenous knowledge, and where this really fits in, particularly around resource management and managing of waterways and things. So
well, thank you for reminding us. Very important. Now, I'm afraid I've been given a signal down the back that we must close. So let's wrap up quickly so you can have a quick cup of tea or a coffee and have a snack outside and then join the next country-led sessions. But before then, maybe I'll just quickly like to thank the panel members for joining us and talking with us today.